Today I want to talk about how to improve an important part of user research. That's the interacting with users part. As I was saying, this is me. I wrote the book, that book specifically. I've been doing research and design for a really long time, and you know, I remember when we used to have to explain to people what user research was, and that happens less and less these days, which is a really good thing. These days, you know, a majority of people that I talk to at least understand that, you know, user research is a thing, and that it's a good thing, and that we should all be doing it. And now that we're all doing it, that's fantastic, but it comes with its own set of problems. The first problem that people run into when they're trying to decide from this, you know, huge wealth of different things that they could be doing, is they have to figure out if they should be doing moderated or unmoderated testing. This was not a decision that we used to have to make. You know, 20 years ago, we didn't have unmoderated testing. It was all moderated. But now we do have an option, and that's a good thing because they both have pros and cons, and they're good for really entirely different things. So how do you decide if there should be an actual human being asking questions and directing tasks during usability testing, or if this is just sort of the thing that you can let happen remotely without a moderator? And to decide this, I want to look at what the benefits and drawbacks of each method are. So moderated testing has actually a lot of benefits, even when you're doing it remotely, especially when you're doing it remotely. The most important difference is that, you know, there is a human being there to dig in on the interesting things that happen. And I can't tell you how often I'm doing a user research session and, you know, the user will do something or say something really unexpected and potentially useful. And if I'm not there to say, oh, tell me more about that, you know, they just kind of move on without ever getting at why, you know, they said what they did. Equally important, anybody who's ever watched a usability test knows that, let's just say participants can go on and on about things that are maybe not that useful to you. You know, they'll spend minutes explaining how you should fix something when all you really want to know is the problem that they're having, or they'll spend an hour telling you why they hate your login process when that's honestly not something that you can change at the moment. Having a person there can get the conversation back on rails so that you get the most value for your time. And finally, having a person in the room or on the phone can help you make a personal connection. It's just easier to ask for things like follow-up, or, you know, to ask if you can talk to the participants' friends if they were a really good participant and they're, you know, in a hard-to-reach group. Now, the downsides are fairly obvious. Moderated testing is it's more expensive and it's harder to schedule, especially when it's in person. You know, remote moderated is a lot easier to schedule, but there's still scheduling issues. You have to have a person and they have to be available. And the last reason that they can be tough is that you actually have to be a pretty good moderator in order to not screw them up. And we're going to look at how to solve that in just a few minutes. Now, unmoderated testing is it's exactly the opposite, right? Unmoderated, it's cheap, it's easy to schedule, but it doesn't give you any control over the conversation, and you don't develop a rapport with the person. And one thing to mention about scheduling is that you should remember there are people who are not in your time zone. And if you have an international product, and many of us do, you should be testing it internationally because, you know, things are different in other places, and not everybody sees things in exactly the same way that you do. So some places in the world are 12 hours off from you, and unmoderated testing can help you to reach some of those folks that you just wouldn't be able to reach without getting up in the middle of the night to talk to them. So that's a real benefit of unmoderated. So when do you do each one? I generally say that when you're learning about your user, you need to have a human being doing the moderation. Sometimes it pays to be in the room or the car or the office or whatever, but that's not generally the most important part, the physical presence, if you're learning about your users. You need to be able to ask them the right questions and dig in and follow up and do all those things that, you know, we're going to talk about. Basically, if you're generating ideas, being able to ask the questions yourself is really useful. On the other hand, if you're doing, you know, quick prototype testing of a very specific thing, or finding out if a particular change in the prototype or product made it easier to get through a checkout flow, unmoderated is quick, it's easy, it's totally worth it. There's a certain beauty to setting up a quick unmoderated test, going off to lunch, and then coming back and having 5 videos of people using your new checkout flow. Research can be a lot like exercising. You know, the best research for you may be the kind that you actually do, and there's no denying that unmoderated testing is very, very easy to do. But sometimes we make ourselves do the harder workout, and we're better for it. In research terms, that means learning to be good moderators. Unfortunately, despite our best intentions, most of us get moderated research wrong. I mean, really, really wrong. When we first start out, we're awful at it, and I mean, I certainly was. For some reason, there seems to be this belief that just because you can talk to somebody, you can interview them. And that's not really the case. Luckily, when we're just starting out, everybody seems to make the same damn mistakes. And I've collected many of the worst offenders here, and I'm going to go through them. And then at the end, I'll share an exercise that will help you to start to identify and correct them that you can do on your own. Now, the first mistake that I see people make is that they think they're supposed to talk to users. I mean, we keep saying that, right? Like, we need to talk to some users, but really, we should be spending as little time talking to users as we possibly can. Instead, I want you to start thinking about it as listening and observing, or facilitated listening and observing. Have people tell you stories. Watch actual behavior. Watch how it differs from what they tell you. What little talking you do should involve asking questions and digging deeper. Now, the next problem is that you sell your idea. Now, look, I get it. You're in love with your product. You're supposed to be in love with your product. It's what you think about every single day. You think about it all the time. But when you're learning from users, you really need to let go of that. You need to stop selling just for a little while, not forever. Because you're never going to learn if you're too busy selling. Your enthusiasm for your product is going to make the participant feel really uncomfortable telling you what she actually thinks. Instead, I want you to stop pitching and start listening. Make it clear that you're really open to all feedback. Say that. I am open to all feedback, both positive and negative. And you need to mean it. And you're going to learn what people think about your product by doing that. And that's going to help you a lot more than making that single sale would. Of course, nothing shuts a conversation down faster than a yes or no question. And yet, every time I hear somebody who is new to interviewing, the entire session feels like an interrogation. Do you like this product? Yes. Do you use this feature? No. Have you ever seen the feature before? Yes. It's maddening and nobody learns anything. The problem with yes or no questions is that they leave no room for nuance or explanation. You only get a report of whether somebody did something, not why they did it or how they felt about it or the context of the story. It turns qualitative research into a survey with this really small sample size, and that's just the worst of all possible worlds. Instead, before you start talking to users, I want you to go through your discussion guide, which you wrote, right? You wrote a discussion guide, and find all the places where somebody could answer yes or no. And I want you to just get rid of as many of those as you possibly can. Now, every so often, you're going to keep one in there. It's fine. Don't drive yourself crazy trying to get rid of every single one. For example, you might ask somebody, have you ever used this product before? Before you jump in and ask them to tell you a story about the last time they used it. That's cool. But wherever you can, I want you to get rid of the yeses and the nos so that, you make a little room for the maybes and the oh my God nevers and the I only use it in the mornings. The answers where you learn stuff and, where you learn something useful that you might not be able to get better from metrics. So this is a good example. The bad example here is, do you use this product every day? Well, yes or no. It's not, you're never going to get a most days except for this really interesting exception. The good is when do you use this product? They're going to tell you a story about that. So here's the next one. And before I get into it, I'd like to take a little break to tell you about an amazing new product right now. It's going to revolutionize the way you think about fitness. That's right. There is a product I am selling that will help you take off 20 pounds in less than a month. Less than a month. Can you imagine? Actually, can you imagine? What are you imagining? I'll bet some of you are imagining a revolutionary exercise program, right? CrossFit, or something even less pleasant. Some of you, maybe a new diet drug. Some of you maybe a special tracking app or a smart device. Is anybody thinking about somebody just following you around and slapping the food out of your hand? No? That's just me? That's my idea? Great. The thing I'm trying to point out here is that without anything to react to, without anything to look at, we're all just sort of imagining our own solution to a problem. And we're all imagining something really different from one another. The awful way that I see this happen is when people say, would you like it if product did X? For example, would you like it if your alarm clock woke you up with a cup of perfectly brewed coffee? Yeah, of course I would. That'd be fantastic. Coffee alarm clock I'm imagining would be great. problem is I might not like the actuality of the coffee alarm clock that took up half my nightstand and had to be cleaned every day and was a hassle to set up every night. So instead of getting feedback on the thing that your participant is, thinking about or imagining, I want you to show them something. If you have a product and want feedback on it, show them the product. If you want to see how they'd interact with a particular feature, show them a prototype of the feature. If you're just interested in their problems, that's fine. You don't actually have to show them anything, but in that case, you're not asking them to imagine what a product might be like. You're asking them to tell you about their reality, and that is something that we're all much better at doing than imagining the same thing altogether. Of course, when we do show participants something, a prototype or product, somebody else's product, they run a slightly different risk. See, for some reason, there's this really strong temptation to turn research into a product demo. And I can't tell you how often I have seen somebody basically starting a usability test of a prototype by just showing the participant all the things that she's going to need to know. It sounds insane when I talk about it this way, but pay attention the next time you're watching a new interviewer run a usability test. They give the participant way more information about the product or prototype than they would otherwise have. But the thing is, we're not testing your understanding of the product. I know that you know how your product works. That's not important. I mean, it is important that you know how it works, but that's not the point. What we're testing is whether somebody could figure out how to use the product if you weren't there, because most of the time, you won't be there. So instead of starting every session with a guided tour, give the participant some time to explore, see where they go and where they get stuck. Ask them to perform a task and just let them do what they would naturally do. And here's the thing, when you set up a task, never give the participant more information than they would have naturally if they were to find the product or that feature on their own. You want to give them just exactly what they would have if they showed up there, independently. Now, you're probably a helpful person. That's why you were giving the guided tour, right? You don't enjoy seeing people struggle. You're not a sadist. You're not a monster. It's really painful to watch people struggle, especially when it's our product that they're struggling with. That's awful. And I've been in usability tests before where a participant was struggling, and I've seen interviewers honestly point to the screen and just say there, click that button, that one, the big red one. And believe me, I totally get it. I understand the impulse. But you have to resist it. You really do. You see, we learn from failure. We learn how to prevent it. We learn, what will actually happen when we're not in the room. Because if somebody's failing to use your product or your prototype in a usability test, other people are going to fail in the wild, and you're not going to be sitting next to them to help. So let them fail to use your product, even if it makes you profoundly uncomfortable. You can always set aside 10 minutes at the end of the session to help them if they're a regular user of your product and you'd like to do some customer support. But first, you have to let them fail in order to help them succeed in the future. So tell me, is a leading question when you ask a question in such a way as to give the listener a hint as to what answer you want? It is that. That is very good. How on earth could you have known that? Unfortunately, that's my stupid little example of a leading question, but they're really easy to do, and they're really harmful to your research since they mean that we get answers that aren't nearly as honest as we would like. So take a look at these questions here. That first question is bad. It's just terrible. It's not just because it's a yes or no question, although that doesn't help it, but also because it presupposes the answer. Of course, it's very possible that the person that you're asking this question of did sign up for help with their taxes. It's also very possible that that was only one of a number of reasons. By asking the more neutral, non-leading question, you're going to leave the field open to hear all the answers to this question, one of which might be that they wanted help with their taxes, but there might be 3 others that you're also going to hear, and those 3 others might be more important to you. One of the most important things that you can do to ensure a good study is to write a thing called a discussion guide, as I mentioned before. And that's basically, it's a list of things that you want to learn during the study. And it serves as a way to make sure that you're asking the same basic set of questions to everybody so that you get lots of data about a few things rather than just general feedback that can be hard to analyze or do anything with. Another really important thing that you can do to improve your research is to occasionally ignore your discussion guide entirely. What? No, that's actually true. You sometimes just want to pretend that it isn't there. You see, if you're lucky, your participants are going to say some really, really interesting, useful things. If you jump to the next question, like, you're reading a survey, you're going to miss all that really interesting stuff. So instead of just going through and reading a list of questions, you need to follow up, and you need to keep digging until you understand the why. You need to keep asking why until you get beyond that surface. One of my favorite methods for doing this is I call the "what's blank about it" question. Often you'll show a participant something or tell them something, and they'll respond with, "Oh, that's so cool," or "Oh, that's really hard to use," or something along those lines. Now, the problem with this feedback is that it sounds important, especially when they say, "Oh, that's wonderful," but it's totally non-actionable. What can you do with "that's confusing"? I mean, honestly, what can you do with "that's wonderful"? You need to know what specifically is confusing and what specifically is so wonderful. You do that by following up with the phrase, "what's confusing about it?" or "what's wonderful about it?" If you don't get something incredibly useful and insightful after that, you keep following up with, "Tell me more about that. Go on." Whatever it is, when a participant says something interesting, don't just let it go. Keep following up until you understand the why. Okay, I know. We talked about this. You love your product. You've been working on it so hard. It's all you think about. It's your baby, and nobody likes to hear that their baby is ugly. But that can cause some problems. And when somebody starts criticizing your baby, you can react badly, honestly. I've seen it happen. Interviewers start arguing with the participants. They start saying that the participant is wrong. But remember, the participant is there to help you. And if you can't hear bad things about your product or idea, then you need to learn what you need to fix. You're there specifically to hear the bad stuff, so get used to it. Most importantly, however painful it is, however much you want to cry or scream or argue, you must not make the participant feel judged. It's not her fault that your product is terrible, and even if you don't agree with her that your product is terrible, she's still doing you a favor by being honest with you. So smile and thank her for her honesty, and it just might save your product. So what can get really expensive? User research. I mean, sure, we try really hard to do it faster and cheaper, and there are certainly ways that you can do that, but still, it does take time, and time is an expense. And if you don't do anything with the results, well, you've just wasted that money. What good is learning all the ways you need to improve your product if you then just write a report and send it into the cloud and forget all about it? So don't waste your time and money on research that you're not going to act on. Now, there are a lot of ways to make it more likely that results will get acted on. For example, you should involve other members of your team in the research so they're invested, they believe what you say. Don't spend lots of time writing 20-page PowerPoint decks like this or long research reports. Just turn study recommendations into immediately actionable bullet items and get them into your next sprint. And always, always plan what you want to learn. I mean, this doesn't mean you're going to know exactly what the results will be, because why would you be doing the test if you knew that? But you should be focused on a very specific thing, like learning whether a new feature is usable, or maybe it's learning what sort of people are using your product, or maybe it's seeing what obstacles exist in your onboarding flow. Maybe you should just watch my workshop that I have on Udemy about how to decide what sort of research you should be doing. I cover a lot of that. But whatever you're doing, make sure that you're designing your studies in a way that makes it more likely that you'll act on the results. But the number one problem that I see when I'm teaching folks how to do research, the hardest thing for new interviewers to do, you talk too much. Remember at the beginning when I said you shouldn't talk to your users, you should listen to them? Well, it's true, and you should talk even less than you think you should. Once you've welcomed the participant, made them comfortable, and maybe given them a task to perform, you should be doing a very small percentage of the talking, maybe 10%. Sure, you're going to ask questions and follow up, but a lot of what you're going to say are going to be things like, "Tell me more," and "What was confusing about that?" It's harder than it sounds, and silence is uncomfortable. But you need to give the participant time to think and respond. And to do that, you're going to need to learn to shut the hell up. It is honestly the single most important thing that you can do when you're doing user research. So, now that I've explained how to do it, I'm going to give you a fun way to try it yourself. You're not going to do this now, but later, when you want to get better at this, try this exercise. You get into groups of 3 people, and it has to be 3. And I'll give you some topics that you can use, or you can use them, or you can come up with your own, or if you have your own product or prototype, you can actually practice with somebody who isn't a customer, just with like a coworker using your product. Now, before you start interviewing, take 5 minutes, write down some questions about one of the topics. Then once you've all written down your questions, you're going to start the interviewing. Now, one of you will play the interviewer, one of you will play the participant, and one will be the note taker. But the trick is that the note taker is not taking notes on the actual interview. The note taker is taking notes on the interviewer. Specifically, you're going to check to see which of the rules we talked about they are violating. Now, don't worry, there's going to be a list of those things in a couple of slides. You do the interview for about 5 minutes, and you take 2 minutes for the note taker to give feedback on what could have been improved. And then you switch, and then you switch again, and everybody should have a chance in each of the roles. Now remember, when you're giving each other feedback, please be kind to each other. It's really hard, much harder than it looks, and especially for the person who volunteers to go first. So be thoughtful with your feedback. Being kind doesn't mean not giving important feedback. It just means delivering it in a way that doesn't make anybody never want to do this again. And remember, the other person is going to give you feedback, so do unto others. These are the kinds of topics you can use. Like I said, you can also pick your own topic, but they should be things that the other person would be able to talk about. Don't try things for NASA astronauts if you're not working with a bunch of NASA astronauts. If you have a prototype or product, like I said, you can get feedback on that real thing. But the trick is that you're just practicing the interviewing part. And for note takers, and I think these slides will be available after this, here's the list of the common mistakes that we talked about. But feel free to note anything else that looks like it could have gone better. You'll want to make enough notes to give the interviewer examples of how they did each thing wrong. And here's the thing. The first time you try this exercise, the first time that you actually do a moderated interview, unless you've had a lot of experience, you're going to suck at it. But don't worry, you get better at it. I was terrible the first time. I mean, really, really bad. I've been doing it for 20 years now, and I'm better. But so if you stick with it and get feedback and work on eliminating the problems I talked about, you won't be awful for very long. So, but that's all the info that I have for you today. And hopefully this will make you a better moderated user tester. Make sure to practice and make sure to run lots of interviews, because that's how you make your product better, as well as making yourself better at interviewing. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica, who has some info about an awesome new feature from Validately that might help with this. And at the end, we're going to take some questions.
Hey, Laura, you can keep the presenter role, actually.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's just the 2 slides.
Okay. Yeah. Stephen, did you want to review the Validately moderated offering?
Sure. So for those who don't know, we've been working really hard on expanding our suite of user research tools and services to get into moderated. We're big believers in the value of moderated testing, and frankly, we feel through talking with a lot of our customers that there's still a lot of pain points around sourcing people, scheduling people, setting up and conducting the moderated test, as well as simple, easy technology, especially for mobile, to conduct the moderated technology. So we've been in this private beta period with our moderated technology for a little while, and we just released it today. And so it's basically what our offering is very similar to with our unmoderated. You can do both bring your own testers. So if you just want technology to run moderated tests on desktop or mobile, you can log in and just do that as well. If you need us to source people to meet your specific persona, we offer that as a service as well. We have a number of really creative ways to do that. Sourcing is always a challenge. So if you have questions around how to source testers properly, we'll openly share the techniques that we use. There's some real creative ways to source people for moderated testing. Either we do it for you, or we'll tell you how we do it, and you can do it yourself. But there's a lot of creative ways to do that. We offer that as a service as well. But the way it works is, like I said, for desktop or mobile, share a URL and conduct the session as you want. So let me see here. Was there any other slides, Jess? Or is this the one slide you just wanted me to talk to?
Just this one.
Okay, great. So there's a free offer. If you tweet out about the webinar, you get a free $30 panel credit. But we can open up questions to the group as far as our moderated technology for Validately, as far as sourcing people, what are good techniques to source people, or any other of the stuff, the great techniques that Laura mentioned. So the way we'll do this is to keep a little bit of an organization. Just put your question right in the chat, and I can answer them or ask them out loud. Good question. When is it appropriate to hire a professional moderator?
When is it appropriate to hire a professional moderator? That's an excellent question. There are a few cases in which I would hire a moderator, and let me kind of answer this in two ways. So you can hire just a moderator, just somebody to ask the questions, or you can hire a professional sort of user researcher to help you figure out your user research plan and to run everything separately. And you do those in different cases. If you're just looking at the moderator, you just want somebody who will sort of ask the questions for you, and kind of do what you've asked. I would do that in a couple of cases. One, if you're dealing with a culture that is not yours and you don't necessarily understand. So, for example, if you're doing anything internationally, or if you're talking to a lot of international folks and there might be, a language barrier, or there might just be a culture barrier, sometimes it can be really nice to have somebody who is local, who understands how to talk to people and what their issues are going to be, and what sort of the prevailing, what the idioms are and what they might mean if they say something. So just if there's any kind of understanding barrier, I think it's a really nice thing. Also, honestly, in some cases, especially for startups where the person who's doing the moderating is, the founder, every so often you get one who just really can't divorce themselves from the pitching. Especially if they're a really sales-oriented founder, they can get very defensive. And so in that case, I think it's nice to have somebody along who can just make sure that the questions are getting asked in a more neutral manner. And sometimes I always like to have the person making the product decisions very intimately involved in the research, but maybe not having them ask the questions specifically if they're not capable of being very neutral. But I think that it's really important to have them practice so that they can eventually ask those questions.
Yeah, I think the thing is, my 2 cents on that would be, don't let perfection or the pursuit of perfection get in the way of conducting a moderated session. So, it takes a long time to get, be an expert, but it doesn't take a long time for you to have a normal conversation with a customer or a potential, customer, and try to understand, empathize and put yourself in their shoes and ask open questions that get them talking, to understand how they would use this in their daily lives and how this feature is going to help them, and what are some of the challenges they might have, the practical challenges they might have in doing this. I always talk about with people. I always say there's 2 types of usability tests. The first usability test is, can you tactically go on this UI? Can you tactically go from A to B to C, because I want to get you to C and your landing page is A, right? So that's like the classic usability test example. And then of course there's the real world usability, right? Which is like in the real world, in your day job, when you log in the morning, if it's a B2B product or if it's a consumer product, when you open up the app or whatever it is, like what's going to block you? Are you in the real world? Are you going to be able to conduct the tasks that we put in front of you, the features that we put in front of you, or are there going to be real world things that are going to be blocking it? Like a classic example, I was talking to a customer one time, and they needed in their B2B product, they needed a customer to attach a specific file to go through their flow. And if you're just doing a usability test from a click prototype, everyone was able to pass. But when they built the product and they released it, customers told them, oh, well, I have to get approval to actually do that in the real world, right? Like in the real life, I can't just upload that document that's important information. You got to go through all these things. The sales cycle ended up being longer. The implementation cycle ended up being longer. And customers kind of felt like the value wasn't worth the headache. So that's where moderated can uncover stuff that unmoderated can't. And, just try to put yourself in the shoes and just ask open-ended, non-leading questions. Let the customer talk. Shut up, as Laura eloquently, put it. But don't let perfection, like I'm not a an expert moderator. Like don't let that get in the way of at least of listening to your users. Any other questions from the group? Well, I'll throw out a question because this comes up all the time, and I know this is an issue for a lot of people, which is sourcing people. So getting people that match your persona. There's always a pain point around that, and I'll tell you what we do. Well, let me. Charlotte just asked a question, which is a good question, but let me finish this thought, and then we'll go to Charlotte's question. I'll tell you what we do. We do this a lot on behalf of customers. We offer it as a service, but I can share with you what we do. It depends on the persona and what criteria you're looking for. But in my view, you can always go after like good targeting. We do stuff in LinkedIn or Facebook to target people. You can do great kind of ad campaigns and really be very targeted with your advertisements and drive people into a kind of a landing page where you screen them, you drive them through a screener. That's great. But I think the most creative sourcing technique that I've heard of, and we've been doing this for some customers, is what's called in-the-moment targeting. And what that means is capturing someone who's about to make a decision. They've given a signal that they're about to make that purchase decision. So practically that means Google AdWords, so search. So putting a campaign in Google search. So a classic example is I'm creating an app for buying golf clubs. Well, if I buy an ad in Google AdWords targeted for people who search for tailor-made golf clubs, and I can drive someone from that search right into kind of a moderated test, that is like as true of a user test as possible because it's someone who's not a professional panelist. They're cold coming off the web. There's no kind of history or anything like that, but they are truly representative. They're about to make a purchase decision. They're in the moment, and so that's a great person as a persona kind of to talk to, right? So there's a bunch of creative ways, whether it's through LinkedIn has a lot of great targeting for B2B, and Facebook has a lot of great targeting for consumer stuff. You can get into interests and likes and all that type of stuff. And then you have in-the-moment targeting with Google AdWords. We do that on behalf of customers. If you want to do it yourself, we can tell you how to do it as well. So Charlotte had a question, and this would be for Laura. How do you handle distracted participants?
Distracted participants. That's a tricky one. So I'll give you the sort of moderate. I'll give you the professional moderator tip, which is if it's really bad, if they're really distracted and they're just absolutely not giving you good feedback, there is absolutely no shame in ending a session early. Don't waste your time. So I think that this is a thing that a lot of moderators have to sort of get over. It's tough because you've spent all this time to get people set up, but if there are any situations, and I'll tell you this, if there are any situations where you feel like you're not getting, and there's no way that you can get the information that you need, or you feel physically unsafe if you're actually in person, or any one of a number of circumstances, you are 100% free to say, thank you so much, you may go. That said, I think that getting them back on track is possible sometimes. Having a specific product and having them have tasks to do really helps with that. And I would like to point out one important thing, which is that in real life, your users will be distracted. One of the fun kinds of usability testing things to do is to go out and to do your usability test in a really distracting environment, like a bar or a coffee shop. Not like where you're recruiting the people from there, but like if you have them be in a really distracted environment, or their offices. And the reason that's interesting is because in real life they're going to be distracted. So seeing that if they can still perform tasks while being distracted is kind of a useful thing to know. But I think the thing that I'm taking away from your question is, those people who are just like, they showed up for the incentive and, they're just not paying any attention, and they're, constantly checking their phone, and they're not trying to do anything that you're asking them to do. And, sometimes you just kind of have to say, well, we got a dud. Well, that's why you recruit a few extra people, honestly. I always like to say that, you recruit 8 people, and, sometimes you get one no-show and one crazy person. So that's why you recruit extra. It's the nice thing about doing some kind of, the nice thing about doing it remotely, or about having somebody else do the recruiting for you so that they can just get somebody in. It's very easy to kind of go, yeah, not that one, let's get another one. So it doesn't ruin the whole test.
Cool. And Charlotte had a follow-up question, which she said, how long would you recommend a moderated session last? Can it be too long?
Well, yes, it can. Now, the tricky thing is that that's going to be very dependent on the kind of thing you're doing. Stephen, you mentioned the sort of, observational testing of like how things work in the real world. You can have, observational sessions where you just go and you sort of sit with the person, or do like a ride along, or, those kinds of like very contextual in-person things. Those can be all-day things. For something that's remote, I generally like things to last between 30 and 60 minutes, honestly. Sometimes things will be 5 minutes, honestly. Sometimes if you just have a few questions, you just want to see them do 1 or 2 tasks, it'll be, 10, 15 minutes, and that's fine. I think it's really hard to sort of keep people's attention for any more than an hour when you're doing, especially any kind of task-based usability. You'll start to see people flag sort of after 30 to 45 minutes if you're just having them do task after task after task. So one thing that I would let you know, one thing that I sometimes will do is I will have a longer discussion guide than I actually plan to use. And I'll have extra tasks that I can run if things go really well. And if I notice that my participant is starting to flag, I might just sort of end it and move on. Again, you're in control. You get to decide when things get to end. And and they're humans, and you're humans, and you can sort of tell when they're starting to get antsy. But it'll depend very much on what kind of thing you're testing and who you're testing it on. If you're testing on children, I would say keep the sessions very short.
All right. Any other questions? Charlotte said thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for on moderated testing? Well, if you have questions afterwards, feel free to email me, and if I can't answer them, I'll send them on to Laura. And Laura's also.
You can also you can email me directly at laura@usersknow.com. I do answer all questions.
Perfect. Or the other thing she's great with is if you message her on if you add her on Twitter, she'll respond, and she's usually pretty good at that too. So if it's a good question that's worth other people learning from, kind of a quick question on Twitter is also, I think, a good way to do it. But all right, well, thank you everyone for your time. If you have any questions, again, follow up via email. If you want to see a demo of the new moderated stuff, you can either log on yourself and to Validately and try it out, or you can shoot me an email. I'm happy to do a demo for you. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a great day.
Bye. Thanks everyone.